Good morning, friends. Welcome to Sutta Study with Bhante Suddhaso. Good to see you, Michael, Geeta, Melinda, Jens, Ella, and Edward. Welcome to all of you friends. This morning we will be studying Majjhima Nikaya 137, the Salayatana Vibhanga Sutta. And you can find the text in the live chat as usual. And you're welcome to type in any questions in the live chat whenever you feel like it, and Bhante will answer them after going through the sutta. And welcome also to Elaine and Sarah. It's good to see you all, friends. And Ishan, great. All right, so I'll pass it to Bhante so we can start.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. So, as mentioned, today we'll be looking at the Salayatana Vibhanga Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya number 137, translated here as Analysis of the Six Sense Domains. So as usual, I'll read through the sutta and give some explanations. And I think the plan today is to get through the first half of the discourse. And then we'll have some questions and we'll go through the second half tomorrow. The sutta begins. Thus have I heard. On one occasion, the Blessed One was living at Savatthi in Jeta's Grove at Anathapindika's park. There, the Blessed One addressed the monks. Monks! Auspicious sir, those monks replied to the Blessed One. The Blessed One said, Monks, I will teach you an analysis of the six sense domains. Listen to this and carefully pay attention. I will speak. Yes, Bhante, those monks replied to the Blessed One. The Blessed One said this, and here he's going to give the table of contents for the sutta, so listing each of the categories of things that he's going to explain throughout the course of the discourse. So he says first, the six internal sense domains are to be known, the six external sense domains are to be known, the six kinds of consciousness are to be known, the six kinds of contact are to be known, the 18 kinds of mental exploration are to be known, the 36 modes of being are to be known. Depending on this, abandon that. There are three establishments of mindfulness which a noble being engages in, which make a teacher fit to instruct a group. Of those who give instructions in practice, such a one is called an unsurpassable trainer of trainable people. So that's a total of 9 topics that he's going to cover in the course of this sutta. So he says, this is the summary of the analysis of the six sense domains. So the word summary is, in Pali, it's uddesa. So uddesa more literally means lifting up or pointing out. And sometimes it's used to mean a summary or an explanation or an indication. But in this case, it's referring to again, the table of contents effectively. So then the Buddha says, the six internal sense domains are to be known. This is what was said. What does it refer to? Eye domain, ear domain, nose domain, tongue domain, body domain, and mind domain. The six internal sense domains are to be known. This is what was said, and this is what it refers to. So the six internal sense domains is eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. So those are the six bases for sensory contact. He says the six external sense domains are to be known. This is what was said. What does it refer to? Sight domain, sound domain, fragrance domain, flavor domain, tangible domain, and thought domain. The six external sense domains are to be known. This is what was said, and this is what it refers to. So these are the six things that we can perceive through our senses. So through the eye, we can perceive sights. Through the ear, we can perceive sounds, and so on. So through the body, we perceive touch. And through the mind, we perceive mind objects, which is translated here simply as thought. But this should be understood to include all form of mental objects. So both verbal and nonverbal thoughts, as well as emotions, images, memories, ideas, concepts, all manner of mental objects would be included there. And there's an interesting thing to point out here, which is that mind objects are considered external sense objects, in the same way that sights and sounds and smells are considered external sensory objects. So you would never think that sound is me, that sound belongs to me. And we know the sound is something external, which we are perceiving through our ears. In the same way, mental objects, mind objects, are not me or mine, but rather they are things which we perceive through the mind. And this is important, particularly as we get more deeply familiar with the mind. We see a lot of things coming and going in the mind, a lot of things happening in the mind. And it's easy to mistakenly believe that everything which appears in the mind is something that we're doing. It's easy to make the mistake of believing that whatever appears in the mind is me, that it defines me or represents me in some way. So I recall one person who was, they were on a meditation retreat, and a lot of horrible, disturbing thoughts started to appear in their mind. And then they came and asked about this, and they were like, I didn't realize I was such a horrible person. It's like, well, you're not a horrible person. There just happened to be some horrible mental objects floating through your mind at that time. But that doesn't mean that's who you are. It just means that those were the mind objects that came within the sensory domain at that particular time. And then he says the 6 kinds of consciousness are to be known. This is what was said. What does it refer to? Eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, body consciousness, and mind consciousness. So again, it's just talking about consciousness of each of the 6 sensory domains. So eye consciousness is awareness of a visual experience, awareness of the visual field. Ear consciousness is awareness of the auditory field, and so on. So it's consciousness of a particular sensory domain. And then he says, the 18 kinds of mental exploration are to be known. This is what was said. What does it refer to? Having seen a sight with the eye, one explores a sight that is a basis for elation. One explores a sight that is a basis for depression. One explores a sight that is a basis for equanimity. And then so on for the other 5 senses, for a total of 18. So he says, in this way, there are 6 explorations of elation, 6 explorations of depression, and 6 explorations of equanimity. The 18 kinds of mental exploration are to be known. This is what was said, and this is what it refers to. So for each one of our 6 senses, we can become aware of an object that produces elation, that makes us happy or uplifted. Or we can become aware of something, an object which makes us depressed, downhearted. Or we can be aware of something which doesn't affect our mood one way or the other, something which we don't react to with either positivity or negativity. And he talks here about exploration. So the Pali word is pavichara. Yeah, so pavichara, so pa means towards or to or out towards. Vi means distinguishing. And chara means wandering. So pavichara has this meaning of like going out towards something and wandering through it and examining it distinctly. So when a sensory object arises, we tend to explore it. We tend to go out towards it and get all wrapped up in it and get caught up in examining and investigating and exploring it. And if something is a basis for elation, it's something that we find uplifting or enjoyable, then we tend to fixate on its upliftingness, on its delightfulness. If something is not so nice, then we tend to fixate on its unpleasantness. We tend to fixate on the discomfort associated with that sensory experience. And if something is neither uplifting nor depressing, then if we pay attention to it, then it's equanimity. If we're not paying close attention, then we tend to slip into apathy and delusion. So then the next one, it says, and this is kind of the keynote part of this sutta, so I think I'll spend some time on this next section, and then we'll probably cut it there for the day. It says, the 36 modes of being are to be known. This is what was said. What does it refer to? There are 6 kinds of householder elation, 6 kinds of renunciate elation, 6 kinds of householder depression, 6 kinds of renunciate depression, 6 kinds of householder equanimity, and 6 kinds of renunciate equanimity. So here the Buddha is making a distinction. He's making a distinction between the elation, depression, and equanimity of a householder, which is referring to your ordinary worldly person, and the elation, depression, and equanimity of a renunciate, which is referring to a sincere, dedicated spiritual practitioner. And I should point out here that normally the word which I translate as renunciate is pabbajita, but here the word is actually nekamma. So it doesn't affect the meaning at all, but it's just worth pointing out that the word here is nekamma. So the same nekamma that we see in the Noble Eightfold Path under samma sankappa, right attitude, there's nekamma sankappa, the attitude of renunciation, the mindset of letting go, the mindset of putting things down, the mindset of not getting obsessed with things. So nekamma is a critical element of Buddhist practice. In fact, from one perspective, it is the core of Buddhist practice. The critical central component of Buddhist practice is nekamma, renunciation, relinquishment, letting go. So the Buddha here is making the distinction between what an ordinary worldling thinks of as elation, depression, and equanimity versus what a dedicated renunciate spirit practitioner thinks of as elation, depression, and equanimity. So then he explains each of these categories. He says, in this case, what are the 6 kinds of householder elation? There are sights discernible by the eye that are desired, enjoyable, pleasing, mentally satisfying, and connected with the carnal world. When one acquires them, sees that one is acquiring them, or when one remembers what one has previously acquired in the past that has ceased or changed, then elation arises. This kind of elation is called householder elation. And then the same with sounds, fragrances, flavors, tangible sensations, and thoughts, mental objects. So householder elation is when there's something that's pleasant, desirable, enjoyable, satisfying, and he says connected with the carnal world. So connected with what in other circles I've heard referred to as meat pleasures. So meat pleasures means like meaty, connected with just ordinary animalistic pleasure, like the pleasure of eating nice food, the pleasure of touching your partner, the pleasure of smelling flowers, the pleasure of listening to music. So this is the ordinary carnal pleasure. So pleasure connected with the physical world. And that also includes mental objects, by the way. So mental objects are often connected to the physical world. There's some relation to the physical world. So let's see if I can find the word that's being used for carnal. Yeah, the word carnal is lokamisa. So loka means world, and amisa literally means meat. So lokamisa means the world's meat. And amisa also sometimes has the meaning of bait. So lokamisa can mean the world's bait, the bait that the world throws at us to get us trapped. Just like you put bait on a fish hook, and the fish comes along and thinks, "Oh, that looks delicious. I'll take a bite." But it takes a bite and it gets caught. So in the same way, lokamisa is the world's bait. So these ordinary animalistic meaty pleasures that we come across, they're the bait which we get hooked on, we get trapped by. So that brings out another meaning of this word carnal. It also has this meaning of bait, the world's bait for us that gets us trapped and caught. And then he says, what are the 6 kinds of renunciate elation? So what's the happiness of a spiritual practitioner as opposed to an ordinary uninstructed worldling? What's the difference between what a monastic, a sincere spiritual practitioner thinks of as happiness compared to what a householder thinks of as happiness? So again, a householder thinks that getting nice sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, and thought, they think that's happiness. Pleasant, carnal things. The householder, the renunciate elation, the Buddha says, having known that sights are impermanent, changing, fading, and ceasing, when one accurately sees with right wisdom that all prior sights, as well as all present sights, are impermanent, unsatisfying, and of the nature to change, elation arises. This kind of elation is called renunciate elation. And the same with sound, smell, taste, touch, and mind objects. So this I find very interesting because here the Buddha is saying that when one accurately, wisely sees the impermanence of sense objects, when one accurately, clearly sees that all sensory objects are dukkha and anicca, they're unsatisfying and impermanent, then we experience elation, we experience happiness, we get uplifted. This seems backwards, but actually that's one's experience. When one practices the recognition of impermanence, it can be a little scary at first because we think we're letting go of the basis for our happiness, but actually we're just letting go of the basis for householder happiness. But what we're discovering is the vast, spacious, blissful serenity of release. We're discovering the happiness of formlessness, the happiness of being beyond sankharas, the happiness of being untouched by the uncomfortable vicissitudes of samsaric life. So there's this happiness of knowing that all the dukkha in the world and all the causes of dukkha in the world are impermanent, changing, not something which has us trapped. So the householder takes the bait and gets caught. The renunciant sees that the bait is insubstantial, the hook is insubstantial, and we're already free. There's nothing which can trap us. So this brings up joy. So this is one of the surprising effects of practicing the perception of impermanence, is it brings up this deep sense of elation, of upliftedness, of joyfulness, blissfulness. Then the Buddha says, in this case, what are the 6 kinds of householder depression? So what is it that depresses a householder? He says, there are sights discernible by the eye that are desired, enjoyable, pleasing, mentally satisfying, and connected with the carnal world, or connected with the world's fate, if you prefer that translation. When one does not acquire them, sees that one is not acquiring them, or when one remembers what one has not previously acquired in the past that has ceased or changed, then depression arises. This kind of depression is called householder depression. And the same with sound, smell, taste, touch, and mind object. So this is the flip side. You're like, oh, well, I really like cookies, but we don't have any. Oh, dukkha. So sad. Or we think, oh, we didn't have cookies yesterday either. Life is so much dukkha. And actually, we've had cookies lately, so maybe we'll say pizza. It's like, oh, no pizza today, no pizza yesterday, no pizza all week. Life is so bad, so terrible. I'm moving back to Italy. So we have this is householder depression. The depression of thinking, oh no, I'm not getting the sensual pleasure that would make me happy if only I had it. And I haven't been getting enough sensual pleasure lately, and that must be why I'm in such a bad mood. Nope, can't possibly be my defilements. Nope, that can't be the problem. It must be the lack of sensual pleasure. That must be the problem. So I remember this. I remember when I was a teenager, this was actually exactly how I would think. I would think, oh, the reason I'm in a bad mood is because I haven't had enough sensual pleasure lately. And if I just go and go to a party, then everything will be fine. Then I'd go to a party and things still weren't fine. And that was actually depressing in its own way, because then I would also know that it wasn't the lack of parties that was the problem. Then I would start thinking, well, maybe this just isn't a good enough party. I need to get an even better one next week. And then everything will be great. But it never was great. So it's always this relentless pursuit of something we can never quite get, which is satisfying sensuality. It just doesn't exist. Can't find it. So householder depression is when we think like, oh, I'm not getting enough sensual pleasure, and I haven't been getting enough sensual pleasure lately. This is just awful. So much dukkha. But it lacks the wisdom to see that the dukkha is caused by wanting the sensuality. Dukkha is caused by thinking sensuality is happiness. Dukkha is caused by not understanding the source of our dukkha. And not recognizing that the impermanence of all things is a basis for elation, if we see it clearly with wisdom. Then the next one, what are the 6 kinds of renunciate depression? I find this section really delicious. The Buddha says, having known that sights are impermanent, changing, fading, and ceasing, when one accurately sees with right wisdom that all prior sights as well as all present sights are impermanent, unsatisfying, and of the nature to change, one establishes this longing for unsurpassed liberation. When will I attain and remain in that dimension which the noble ones have attained and remain in? When one establishes this longing for unsurpassed liberation, then because of that longing, depression arises. This kind of depression is called renunciate depression. And the same with the rest of the 6 senses. So when one clearly sees the impermanence and unsatisfactoriness of all sensory experiences, then one can have this longing for enlightenment arise, this longing for awakening, this longing for liberation. Oh, when will I be free of this horrendous samsaric mess? When will I purify my mind of these defilements that weigh me down day after day? When? Ayasoma is nodding. She knows this feeling. So this feeling tends to be quite familiar with anyone who's been practicing Buddhism for a while. Usually at some point we get into this kind of downhearted mode of like, oh, so hard to do, such a long, difficult path. When will I attain enlightenment? Oh, I wish it was today, but it's not today. probably not tomorrow either. Next week's not looking great either. Maybe next year. No chance. 10 years, 30 years, next lifetime. Oh, so depressing. So this is renunciate depression. So notice again the difference. Household depression is like, oh, I'm not getting enough sensuality, so much dukkha. Renunciate depression is like, oh, I'm not getting enough enlightenment. I'm not getting enough liberation from defilements. I'm not getting enough wisdom. So much dukkha. My practice is not progressing as swiftly as I wish it was. So much dukkha. That's renunciate depression. Like this morning, during morning meditation, my mind was a little bit scattered. So I was having some renunciate depression of like, oh, why am I not getting that delicious samadhi which leads towards penetrating wisdom? Oh, so much dukkha. That's renunciate depression. But then we had a nice breakfast, so I had some householder elation to cover up the renunciate depression, which is not what the Buddha recommends, by the way, as we'll get to in just a moment in the sutta. So the Buddha says, what are the 6 kinds of householder equanimity? Having seen a sight with the eye, there arises the equanimity of a fool, a delusional person, an ordinary person, of an unlearned ordinary person who has not conquered their limitations and circumstances. This kind of equanimity does not transcend sight. Therefore, it is called householder equanimity. And the same with sound, smell, taste, touch, and mind objects. So the equanimity of the fool, of the delusional person, of the ordinary person, this is somebody who they don't understand clearly what their experience is. So they're not reacting with either desire or aversion. So in that sense, it's you can call it equanimity to a point, but it's the equanimity of mental dullness, the equanimity of delusion, the equanimity of ignorance. So that's not the equanimity that we aim for in Buddhism. In Buddhism, we aim for equanimity accompanied by wisdom, clarity, and understanding. So that's true equanimity. So I'm sure we've all met people who are not spiritual practitioners and yet seem to just float through life without a care in the world. They're just like, oh, hey, no problem, everything okay. I do this, I do that, no problem. But that's not true equanimity. That's just this dull-minded, uncaring, almost apathetic approach to life. And it seems peaceful to an extent, but it's this dull, hazy, unwise, unknowing peacefulness, which is quite dangerous, because since we don't understand our experience clearly, then we can very easily slip into much darker states of mind, much more harmful states of mind. So then the Buddha says, what are the 6 kinds of renunciate equanimity? And he says, having known that sights are impermanent, changing, fading, and ceasing, when one accurately sees with right wisdom that all prior sights, as well as all present sights, are impermanent, unsatisfying, and of the nature to change, equanimity arises. This kind of equanimity is called renunciate equanimity. And the same with sound, smell, taste, touch, and mind objects. So once again, the Buddha is pointing to the perception of anicca and dukkha. So we clearly see that all sensory experiences are ultimately unsatisfying and impermanent. So then we also recognize that there's no point in getting wrapped up in them. There's no point in getting attached to the pleasant or averse to the unpleasant. But rather we watch what comes and goes as being the natural unfolding of causal processes within samsara. And we recognize that we have the choice to be unaffected by what comes and goes within samsara. So this is wise equanimity. This is the equanimity of clearly seeing that we have the choice of not being disturbed or bothered by what comes and goes in samsara. So this is very different from that kind of like dull, hazy, stoner-like peacefulness of the unwise ordinary person. So the Buddha says, the 36 modes of being are to be known. This is what was said, and this is what it refers to. So the 36 modes of being is referring to the householder and renunciate forms of elation, depression, and equanimity in relation to the six senses. Then the next category, and this will be the last one for today, and then we'll switch to questions. The Buddha says, depending on this, abandon that. This is what was said. What does it refer to? In this case, monks, depending and relying on the six kinds of renunciate elation, abandon the six kinds of householder elation. In this way, there is the abandoning of them, the transcendence of them. In other words, so the six kinds of householder elation are attachment to the pleasantness of sensory experiences, attachment to the pleasantness of sensual experiences. So we overcome that by cultivating the recognition of impermanence, the recognition that all sensory experiences are unsatisfying, impermanent, and subject to change. And delighting in the spaciousness, openness, the freedom, the serenity, the blissfulness that comes from letting go of dependence on sensual experiences. So that's that's how we replace the householder elation with the renunciate elation. Then he says, depending and relying on the six kinds of renunciate depression, abandon six kinds of householder depression. In this way, there is the abandoning of them, the transcendence of them. So the six kinds of householder depression, once again, are seeing when we lose our sensual pleasures, when we can't access our sensual pleasures, like when the Nutella runs out, or your partner breaks up with you, or your TV show gets canceled, or whatever it is. So when we lose access to our sensual pleasures, then we get all depressed and irritable and downhearted. So we reflect, well, everything is impermanent, unsatisfying, of the nature to change. And if I could just attain enlightenment, then I would not be bothered by these things. If I could just attain awakening, then I would no longer be affected by running out of Nutella. Oh, when will I attain enlightenment so I stop getting bothered by this silly stuff? When will I finally attain awakening so my mind is no longer afflicted by these base, petty defilements? So that's how the renunciate depression replaces the householder depression. And then depending and relying on the six kinds of renunciate equanimity, abandon the six kinds of householder equanimity. In this way, there's the abandoning of them, the transcendence of them. So this is, again, the difference between the householder and renunciate equanimity is with the degree of wisdom and understanding. So householder equanimity is that dull, hazy, unknowing, unwise, ignorant kind of indifference. So then when we see our mind slipping into householder equanimity, then we try to cultivate a clear, wise understanding. So cultivating sharp mindfulness, sharp awareness, sharp insight into the nature of our experience. So seeing it clearly, understanding it clearly, and clearly understanding that since all sensory experiences are impermanent, unsatisfying, and of the nature to change, then there is no good reason to react with positivity or negativity to anything that comes and goes. In this way, renunciate equanimity replaces householder equanimity. Then the Buddha says, depending and relying on the six kinds of renunciate elation, abandon the six kinds of renunciate depression. So this is talking about again, we get lost in that mind of like, oh, when will I attain awakening? When will I be liberated from these horrible defilements? Well, then we come back to our practice. We cultivate that perception of equanimity, that perception of impermanence. Seeing clearly that happiness is not found in the sensual world. That happiness is found through renunciation, through letting go, through wisdom. And through that, then our joy starts to come up again. And also the joy of knowing that we're on the path to awakening. The joy of knowing that our practice is working. The joy of knowing that we are breaking free of sensuality. We are diminishing our reliance on sensuality. So then that renunciant elation starts to replace renunciant depression. And then he says, depending and relying on the 6 kinds of renunciant equanimity, abandon the 6 kinds of renunciant elation. So this also is pointing to the renunciant elation as also being an unstable state of mind. So it's still a form of attachment and obsessiveness. So attachment to the conditional happiness of having particular pleasant experiences in our meditation practice and our spiritual practice. So instead, cultivating equanimity, the mind which is not swayed by the shifting conditions of the world. In this way, the mind can move towards a deeper state of peace, stability, and clarity. Then the Buddha talks about kinds of equanimity. He says there's equanimity based on variety and equanimity based on unity. Monks, what is equanimity based on variety? Monks, there's equanimity regarding sights, sounds, fragrances, flavors, and tangibles. Monks, this is equanimity based on variety. So that's equanimity related to what seems to be a variety of different independently existing objects. And monks, what is equanimity based on unity? Monks, there is the equanimity dependent on the domain of infinite space, on the domain of infinite consciousness, on the domain of nothingness, on the domain of neither perception nor non-perception. Monks, this is equanimity based on unity. So here he's referring to the formless attainments, the formless states of mind. So states of mind where one drops the perception of all physical form and the mind becomes unified around a single object, a single way of relating to reality. So dropping all perception of separate objects and just perceiving infinite space or infinite consciousness or nothing at all, or entering the state of neither perception nor non-perception. This is interesting because it's one of the very few places in the suttas where the Buddha actually encourages developing the formless attainments. In most suttas, he just mentions them offhand, if he mentions them at all, and focuses instead on encouraging the development of the 4 jhanas. This is one of the very few places where he actively encourages developing the formless attainments. And the point he seems to be making here is that the development of the formless attainments can be a way of helping us to break our attachment to experiencing a variety of different sensory phenomena. So this more subtle form of desire, this desire for variety in our experience, this attachment to experiencing a variety of objects. So the Buddha says, in this case, monks, depending and relying on the equanimity based on unity, abandon the equanimity based on variety. In this way, there's the abandoning of that, the transcendence of that. In other words, the willingness to let go of all the physical senses, so letting go of the appearance of separate objects. But this is still not quite perfect because there's still the experience of mind, the experience of self and mind. So I am this mind which is aware of infinite space. I am this consciousness which is aware of infinite space. So it's still not perfect, So the formless attainments are not enlightenment, though people sometimes mistake them for that. The formless attainments are just another conditional state of mind, which can come to an end. So the final step is the Buddha says, depending and relying on non-identification, abandon the equanimity based on unity. So the Pali word non-identification is atamayata. So there's actually a great book by Ajahn Amaro, which is all about this one word, atamayata, and the various places it appears in the suttas and how it's used. I think the name of the book is Atamayata, the Final Word in Buddhism, which is kind of an unusual title, but it's a pretty thorough investigation of this particular word. Ajahn Buddhadasa also spoke extensively about this word, Atamayata. Ajahn Buddhadasa also said that this is an extremely important concept within Buddhism. So Atamayata literally means not made of that, not composed of that, not produced by that. So non-identification means that we don't identify as being made of anything in particular. We don't consider ourselves to be anything in particular. So atamayata then is closely related to anatta, not self. So atamayata, it's like, well, so right now there's the experience of just a mind perceiving unified infinite space, but that's not me either. I'm not made of that. That doesn't define me. That doesn't identify me. That's just another impermanent piece of samsara. That's not me either. So this perception of atamayata, I am not made of that, helps to break even attachment on very refined states of mind. So the Buddha says, depending on this, abandon that. This is what was said, and this is what it refers to. So at this time, we'll go ahead and switch to questions, and we'll finish up the sutta tomorrow. So if you have any questions or comments, please type them in the live chat, and I'll answer them as best I can. Okay.
Thank you, Bhante. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. There are no questions just yet, but
how is that possible?
Everybody was listening very carefully.
Okay, I'll take that answer.
But we have a few friends that have joined in the meanwhile. Hello to Galaxy, tuning in from Malaysia, and hello Liz and Carol and Miguel, tuning in from Chile, and Mark, and good to see you. All right, beautiful sutta.
Yeah, and again, I've been referring to the sutta from time to time because I really like the distinction the Buddha makes between householder, elation, depression, equanimity, and renunciate, elation, depression, and equanimity, and especially renunciate depression. So this is something which spiritual practitioners commonly run into. Is this state of mind of like, oh, when will I attain enlightenment? The path is so long and hard and so much dukkha. So I find it lovely that the Buddha actually directly addresses that state of mind and provides some strategies for how to work with it. Anyway,
yeah, just like the sutta where the deva is lamenting with the Buddha. It's so difficult, hard to do.
Yeah, the Kamada Sutta, which we went over a couple of weeks ago. Okay, anything coming up?
Well, Michael says questions tomorrow, maybe. When we finish the sutta.
Okay, fair enough.
All right, so maybe that's all for this morning, and you can save your questions for tomorrow or comments for tomorrow morning. We'll finish the rest of the sutta. And this evening, Bhante will be sharing words of Dhamma on cosmology. Very interesting topic. And then tomorrow evening, we will have monk chat, so you can bring any questions that you have. Oh, good to see you, Cam and Jen. Great to see you online. And then we will take actually a 2 weeks break starting next week. So we won't have online classes for the next 2 weeks because the monastics here at Empty Cloud will go on retreat. So we needed a retreat after all this sort of Dhamma marathon that we did, that we've been doing during the pandemic. But we will start again on July 29th, same schedule, Wednesday to Friday. So after the 17th, so after Friday, just know that we'll disappear for 2 weeks and then come back on the 29th. All right, great. So look forward to seeing you this evening and tomorrow morning again and tomorrow evening again. All right, we can end with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.